Hello guys, welcome to the course of Laravel 8 API development tutorial. This is part number 11. Inside this video, we will continue all about our API development phase 1, and inside this video, we will do route, model and migration settings. So if I back to slide. So here, in the last video we had discussed that for the API development phase 1, we are discussing over this employees table. Inside this employees table, the columns will have called ID, name, email, phone number, gender and age. So inside this video, first of all, we will create a migration. That migration file basically creates these columns. And in the next, we will create some routes, and inside our route configuration file, we will use get request type, post request type, put request type as well as delete request type. Also we'll do model settings. So step by step all these things we will do inside this video. So first of all, we need to create a migration file. So back to terminal, we will use artisan command to create migration file. So php artisan, let's say make migration, and we will use create employee table. So if I press enter, as you can see here, migration created successfully. Back to editor, go and reload, database, migrations, and here we have our employee table. So we want the table name as per the Laravel naming convention, the table name always be plural. So we won't make it as employees and employees. So here by default the columns we have called ID, which is the auto increment primary key. Next we have the timestamp columns like we have created at and updated at. So as we had discussed that we need only these columns. So ID we got. Now next we need to create these rest columns. So back to editor. Let's say that table. Now the second column we have called, if I go here, this is name. So back to editor, we need to pass name, and we want, let's say the name value should be 120 characters in length. Again, if I copy this line, paste 2 more times. The second one we want for the email address. So if I copy, back to editor, this is for email address. Let's say the email value should be 50 characters in length. Now next we want something phone number. So if I copy, go here, this is phone number, and we want the phone number should be 25 characters in length. The other two columns we have called gender and age. So for this gender, we want enumeration data type, because inside this case we have only few options available, that is male, female and others. Otherwise the age column should contain the integer value. So back to editor. Now if I go here, let's say table, we have for the enum type called enum method. Inside this, the first value we need to pass the column name. So the column name we have called gender. Inside second, we need to make an array in which we will pass the allowed values. So we want that inside this column we have the value either it is male, female or others. Now next, the final column we have called the age, and the age is going to contain the integer value age, and it is unsigned value. So successfully now we have created the structure or the schema of employees table. So after creating migration file, next we need to migrate inside our database. So back to terminal, simply type the command called php artisan migrate. Now if I press enter, it will go and run all the pending migrations and create the table inside database. So if we go here, this is our database, click on structure, and as you can see that by default these all tables generated by Laravel, but here we have our custom table called employees. And inside this employees table, we have the columns as name, email, phone number, gender, age, created at, and updated at. One more thing, we don't want these timestamps values, so we need to remove that. How can we remove? Back to editor and remove this timestamp method here. Again we need to run. So back here, let's say php artisan migrate and simply type the flag called refresh. So if I press enter, this command will roll back all the tables and migrate again. So if I go here, click on structure, and as you can see that the timestamp values now removed from employees table. So after creating table, now next we want some route configuration. To create a routes, or before routes, let's create a model. So this is employees table. We want the model, and as per the naming convention, model should be singular. So we need to create employee model. So if I back to terminal, first of all let's clear this console. We will use the artisan command. So php artisan, let's make model, and we need to pass the model name. So the model name we want something employee. Now if I press enter, model created successfully. If I back to editor, go and reload this directory structure. So we will get the model inside this app models folder, and here we have employee.php. Now inside this file, inside this class file, we will configure some member variables. Let's say the first something protected, and the table we are using for this employee model is something employees. So if I copy the table name, go here inside this model. So this is the table we are using, and one more property, that is fillable. So fillable, why we use this fillable property here? Fillable property allow to assign means mass assignments of all the columns what we are assigning it here. So if I write, let's say name, email, we have something phone number, gender, and age. So when we assign the values via model to all these columns to insert new row inside table, so this fillable property to allow mass assignment to all these columns. So that's why we are using fillable property here. So successfully we have done two settings, one for the migration and second for the model. So if I go inside for the route configuration inside routes folder, as you can see we have a file called api.php. So when we create any API inside Laravel, all the API routes should be configured inside this api.php. And when we call all the routes, by default API prefix should be added inside each of the route. So let's create route here. So here I will call it as API phase 1, and inside this we want our routes. So in the last video, if I close these two files, open up our controller file, that is we have created API controller, and inside this controller file look at all these methods: create employee, list employees, get single employee, update employee, and delete employee. So we need to create route for all these methods. Back to api.php. So what is the request type for all these methods? So to create employee, as we know that we will send some parameters inside body, so we will use post request type because we are going to send data. Here we need to list all the employees what we have inside our database table. So for this case we will use get request type. Again, here we are getting the single employee detail by the help of this employee ID. So in this case we will use get request type, so it should be get type. Now next, inside this update API method we are sending body parameters as well as our update ID, so it should be put request type. And for the delete, if I close this file because I have pressed Ctrl S here, now for the delete API we want delete request type. So on the basis of all these methods type, we need to create API routes inside this api.php. So if I save this file first, go inside this api.php, first of all we need to load this controller. So let's say use API controller. Look at the path. We are getting API controller from controllers folder and API folder. Now if I go here, let's say route, we will use get request type, and the API route is something, let's say list employees, making an array. Inside this, let's say API controller, it's a class, and here this API means that we are going to list all the employees, so it will call list employees method. So copy the method name, go and paste it here. Now next, if I copy, pasting it here, again we are using get request type, but this time this is for single employee. So here we will have single employee, and one more thing, we will pass employee ID into URL. So here ID value will pass, and inside this case we will use the method as get single employee. So if I copy, go and paste it here. Now next, if I copy this route, go and paste it here. Now next, inside this case we are going to use post request type, and this is, let's say add employee. For this route we are using API controller, and the method we will use called create employee. So if I copy and save it here, this time we have used post request type. Again if I copy, pasting it here, and next we want the route for update employee method, so we are using put request type. So here instead of post, let's make it as put request type. The route is something, instead of add, it should be update employee. And one more thing, inside this update employee also we are passing request variable to get access over body parameters, as well as we are passing update ID. So back to api.php file, and inside this route we will pass our employee ID. On the behalf of this ID we will update data. Now it will use API controller, and inside this update employee is the method. Now next, if I copy, we need to create for the delete employee. So this time we have the request type as delete. The route is something, let's say delete -employee. Inside this method, as we know that we need to pass employee ID, so here we have the employee ID. We are using API controller, and the method in this case is something delete employee. So successfully guys, we have configured our routes, we have configured our model, as well as we have done the migration. Now from the next video we will start API development, that is first API called create API. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching and have a great day.